Pardon the interruption. I am Sam Mulberry, and I am joined by
Chris Garretts.
Chris. Welcome to the webisode. We're going to be talking about the second exam, helping students prepare. In Unit 2, we've looked at a couple different aspects of European history. The first we looked at was the Middle Ages. So I want you to try to make the case. Why is the Middle Ages the most important era that we study in CWC?
Yeah, I think for two kind of contradictory reasons. One is that it's so alien to us. There's so much about the Middle Age. I'm sure we're going to talk about Hildegard and mysticism, and we're going to talk about scholasticism, and it seems so foreign to us. It's really the past as another country, and that's great. We really should have moments like that where we're kind of jarred out of the present and realize, man, Europe seems very different from like the Europe we see in TV shows or go visit as tourists. Are we sure this is still Western culture? Is much like us? So that's helpful. I think it's also in some ways familiar. I think there's a part of us as Christians who want to live in Western culture as if, hey, we've built the kingdom of Christ, right? We've built Christendom. We've got a thoroughly Christian kind of society. I think in some ways that'd be more comfortable for us to believe is possible. And so I think if you take it seriously and kind of appreciate what they're trying to do, there's something about Christendom that can be kind of appealing. Now, hopefully it's also become clear, or at least was when you watch the complicating lectures, sort of the problem with that. And so that's something we should think about in our own time. What do we do with that kind of yearning for living in a Christian society when we have, say, non-Christian neighbors, or when a Christian society is unjust? So that's why I find it such an interesting thing to study, even though I'm not a medievalist at all. But Sam, turnabout is fair play. You're the mastermind of our Renaissance Art Museum. Why is the Renaissance the most important era we study in CWC?
This is a great question, Chris. One of the things that I love about the Renaissance is that it's this mix of the classical world, right? The folks in Renaissance are really interested in going back to one of my favorite eras. Yeah, so I feel like I get to have two eras in one because I get to have the classical world, right? Renaissance folks are interested in going back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but at the same time, you're getting the origins of the modern world. It's not quite early modern yet, but it's like laying the track to get to early modern. But another thing that I like about the Renaissance is that it is still a time period where for lots of people, most people, religion is still taken seriously. I actually really like the Renaissance expression of Christianity to the extent that I like sort of this notion of Erasmus is one of my favorite people, right? I love how seriously he takes the Bible, how seriously he takes faith. But this idea that there are these other flowers in the field that we can go to get knowledge and things like that. I love that approach. We get some really interesting turning point moments. I've already talked about Erasmus. We get Gutenberg and the Gutenberg printing press, which is something we probably don't make enough of as we talk about this narrative, how like groundbreaking that is. We get figures like Michelangelo. I'm endlessly fascinated by him. I mean, there's a lot of him in that museum, and that's intentional. I think we don't talk about art enough in this course and the significance of art and sort of and cultural heroes in that way. We get this kind of positivity out of the Renaissance in terms of human potential, which can go too far. And I would say what makes an era important doesn't necessarily mean it's great. So we get this positivity, and that sort of helps lay the groundwork for the modern notion of progress, I think. So, and when we talk about the scientific revolution, things like that, the groundwork is laid here. We also get some of the origins of modern individualism sort of focused here, I think, in some of these Renaissance notions, or maybe a rebirth of individualism in some of these Renaissance notions about human potential. And we also get the origins of, quite frankly, European senses of superiority, which we're going to see play out. And again, that doesn't make it good, but it makes it really, really important.
Very important. Yeah.
Chris, when we go through any unit, it always goes too fast. There's not time to talk about every reading that we wish we could talk about. Is there a reading in Unit 2 that you wished you could have talked about that you didn't get a chance?
Boy, one of my favorite things to do in small group is to actually act out the first like 2 1/4 pages of Goblin and the Green Knight. Now, I managed to find time to kind of talk through like the pentagram and how it turns into a parable for penance, but I love that first 2 pages. Partly because it's fun to act out, right? Like the Green Knight is this really hammy, like chewing the scenery, kind of overacting kind of character. And so there's always someone in small group who really wants to do that. And it's finally their turn to shine. And usually that's me, frankly, because my students are too shy to do it. We do bad British accents. Man, I want to go back in time and do this now because I skipped past it. But the reason I love it so much is, A, we don't do that kind of source often enough. We do things that are theological works and philosophical works. It's pretty rare we just kind of tell a story, right? And so that's kind of fun to do. And I love kind of playing with these different layers of cultural meaning. Like it does start with Christianity. It's set at Christmas. So we can talk about how in the Middle Ages, even time is being structured according to faith. The way we think about the calendar and the seasons and the passage of time is Christian. But then all of a sudden it turns into this Germanic fertility ritual. And it's great because you can kind of remind students, well, remember these Germanic peoples, the Romans called barbarians, were agrarian, right? They're just moving in search of farmland. And in Northern Europe, winter is a big problem if you're a farmer. And so it makes sense that you would have this kind of myth of a god being sacrificed and his blood watering the earth, right? And then we kind of ask, but why are we still telling this story if this is actually written down in the 14th century? I mean, what does that tell us about medievals? Plus, there's funny stuff. I'll never forget that our medieval literature professor, Mark Bruce, explained to us once, this is actually hilarious. Like, think about the head rolling around the floor and the knights jumping up on chairs, getting out of the way of it. It's just great, and it's easy to miss the humor. So that's the reading I wish I'd been able to act out, but at least I could mentally reenact it while I talk to you right now. So
we need more comedy in CWC, I think.
Okay. We really do. Maybe that should just be a spin-off class. We should have a CWC comedy, kind of like an after hours sort of thing. Okay, Sam, let's talk a little bit about what's coming up at the end of the unit, namely the exam, which includes an application essay. Now, because of Easter break, students have a full week to write their application essays. So time pressure should not be an issue here. And maybe it means they can put a little bit more craft, a little more polish into this. Based on how the first one went, any advice to students about how to write their second application essay?
Yeah, I would say my first piece of advice is watch the lecture from March 31st, Wednesday. There's tons of good stuff there. And in fact, if you watched it, because you have a week, watch it again over the weekend, because it's going to be helpful in lots of ways. For one thing, it provides a great review of stuff we talked about in this unit. So it feels like studying, but it's also going to help you understand the question really well. So, because I think that's the big thing, is make sure you understand what the question is asking and make sure you answer the whole question. This question has two distinct pieces. Make sure you're writing both of them. So when we're thinking about the first piece, the idea you want to have in your head is be certain that you understand why medievals valued hierarchy. Not just that they had it, but why. Why was that so attractive to them? If you don't know, ask. Ask a TA, ask fellow students. There's couple hundred people taking CWC. There's lots of people who are thinking about this. Come to my office and ask me. Make sure you understand that. And then for the second part, make sure you actually use a contemporary example. When we've asked questions like this in the past, sometimes this is the spot where students slip up. They're good talking about the past, but they never really pull it up to the contemporary. And I would say, as much as we like him, I don't really think of Martin Luther King as exactly a contemporary. I mean, he lived in the 20th century. He died 10 years before I was born. So like think about the world you're living in. Think about 2021 and how these same issues apply. So I think that those are the things I would try to do to write a really strong application answer.
Yeah, and I would just underscore one thing I told my small group last week. This is all to practice for the final essay that you'll write. And definitely a big part of that will be, can you apply this to the present? And so we want to see that historical comprehension, but we also see that you're paying attention to current events or reflecting on your own experience too.
Absolutely. Chris, any last advice you would have for students as they're preparing for the second exam?
Yeah, I mean, I guess hopefully it's just less nerve-wracking, right? You've taken one of these, you kind of know what it feels like, and you're more accustomed to it. And so some of that pressure should just kind of go away, right? I guess the one thing I'd say is make sure to slow down enough just to read instructions. I was meeting with a student the other day who, I think had actually done fine, but because they, I think, rushed through instructions, they forgot to include the date of the Edict of Milan or Council of Nicaea or something. They forgot to provide two different significances for one of the terms on the first page. And they answered all four of the connection questions when you only have to do three, right? And we just cross out the last one, which happened to be one of her better ones. I just felt terrible because there's probably 6 or 7 points there that you sort of left on the table. But that makes sense. The first time through, you're rushing, you don't know how long it's going to take. I would say slow down, make sure you read, understand, take your time with this. I don't think I don't think time pressure is really going to be a problem for most people with this. So that's my advice. But most of all, be confident. Things will go better the second time. Scores usually rise as long as you put the work in studying and reviewing. So that's our headlines for Unit 2. We'll be back in just a moment to do a little game we like to call Food Chain.
All right, welcome back. We're going to play a little game we call Food Chain. Chris and I have each come up with a list of who we think the 5 most important figures from Unit 2 are, and we're just going to kind of reveal our lists and sort of debate, which list is a better look at kind of what we talked about. And really, this is a way to review thinking about significance. Chris, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so for number 5, I want to start with Hildegard of Bingen. And I just want to place her in this list just on I just love the weirdness that we're reading this vision. And we're not even sure we believe this was a vision. I had one student say it was probably a hallucination, right? Which is probably what I think it is. But she's such an interesting figure. I mean, that she would have the vision, that she'd record it, that she would share it, people would believe it. And it makes her a woman in the 12th century who not only had some monastic order, but is actually consulted by emperors and popes. She's a kind of celebrity of the High Middle Ages. And on so many levels, that tells you a lot about medieval culture, right? Someone like this would be taken seriously. Someone like this would be viewed as someone with particular experience of God. And that there are these kind of weird exceptions. This is a patriarchal society, it's hierarchical, and yet here's God going around all of that to talk directly to a woman and giving her power and influence. And that's not even getting into all the other stuff Hildegard does, right? Like the music that you can find on YouTube and kind of the naturalism and the medical kind of stuff she does, right? It's just such a fascinating, weird story that tells you something about how complex the Middle Ages are. I've got to put her on somewhere. Who's your number 5, Sam?
Chris, I love that you went with sort of a medieval celebrity for number 1 or for number 5, because I'm going to put a Renaissance celebrity at number 5. I have Michelangelo. And again, I kind of said this already in segment 1, but I think art is really important. Michelangelo, he's in the running potentially for the greatest artist of in the Western tradition for sure. I mean, he's somebody who is definitively probably the greatest Western sculptor of all time. And all you have to do is look at things like the David, the Pietà, the Moses, the number of things that he does. It is remarkable. And at such a young age, he's so prolific. Then he undertakes perhaps the most ambitious, famous painting project of all time, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And then he's also the chief architect on St. Peter's Basilica. And he's a poet, and he does all of these things. And I think he encapsulates so much of what we think the Renaissance is in terms of l'uomo universale, in terms of somebody who works with sprezzatura, in terms of somebody who is a cultural hero of the time. He's working with deeply religious subjects. He's a deeply religious person himself, but he's also working with Neoplatonism and thinking about how does that teach me how to create art. So he's both a formalist. He has deep religious content. All of these things. I think he's so significant for helping us understand a time period. He really is an icon or an emblem for not just the value of art at the time, but for the values of the time, ad fontes and things like this. So I'm putting Michelangelo on my list because I don't think he's going to show up on yours. Chris, do you have any Italians on your list?
Well, what do you know? I've got an Italian with the last name beginning with M from the Renaissance as well. I want to talk about Machiavelli. And I think they can make a kind of interesting pair, right? And they hit at some of the tensions of the Renaissance. They're both obsessed with their own celebrity, I think it's fair to say. They both embody the sense of individual brilliance and leaving this lasting mark on their society. I think they're both also, though, a little bit more suspicious of this kind of unbridled optimism, right? Especially later in Michelangelo's career, the image of Final Judgment is not exactly just spry, people are wonderful, right? There's a little darkness. And that's certainly true of Machiavelli. Right, Machiavelli might be a Renaissance humanist who is an ad fontes figure who goes back to Roman sources to understand politics. He has a pretty dark view of human nature, though. And so as he's writing The Prince, this advice manual to a political leader, he says, well, you can try to make them love you, but love is fickle. And people's hearts can change pretty quickly. What doesn't change is fear. Right? People understand coercion and the threat of coercion. And so you don't really want to be hated, but you can't count on being loved. And so, if worse comes to worse, at least you should be feared. And that's a way to hold on to political power. And of course, the reason it's so significant is I think this is mostly how we think about politics. Politics in the modern age is chiefly about the exercise of power. Now, sometimes we like to think that good can arise from it. And sometimes we like to think that our leaders are marked as people of character, right? And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I actually kind of want to see a revival of that right now. But Machiavelli is speaking to a different sense we have, that what we want are strong, decisive types who can hold on to power. And maybe that benefits the rest of us in some way, or maybe we just kind of admire them. What it's not is deeply Christian, right? This is such a radical break with the notion of Christendom, or like contrast with Erasmus saying that the prince needs to be both powerful and good, right? Like this reflection of God. Machiavelli says, forget all that. We just want someone who's a good prince, and good being used in a different sort of way here than ethical or moral. So that's my number 4. Who's 4th for you, Sam?
Chris, I will see your brilliant Italian and I'll raise you a brilliant Italian. I have Thomas Aquinas, and I'm going to say it is fair to say that I have Aquinas too low on this list. In fact, to the point where I'm going to venture to guess that he's on your list up nice and high. So I'm not going to say too much here. I'm not going to mow your lawn for you. I'm going to let you do this yourself. But I think that
you do love mowing lawns, though, I should point out.
I do. Aquinas is the apex of the medieval mind, the apex of Christian scholasticism, which gives a different picture of how do we bring in the wisdom of the ancients into Christianity. This idea of medieval synthesis is really powerful for me. So we keep talking throughout the Middle Ages of this idea of hierarchies, and that all these hierarchies come from God and everything is ordered. And Aquinas is thinking about all of these potential hierarchies, this great chain of being, and all of these things, and thinking about how they synthesize together, how they work together. And he has such a huge philosophical, theological footprint. His view of thinking about all truth is God's truth, his attempts to Christianize Aristotle, his attempts to think about kind of the synthesis of all truth. I think he's got to be on here. And like I said, I'm venturing to guess that he's higher up on yours. So I think you're going to tell us more about this at some point. But who do you have at number 3?
Yeah, we'll just have to see. At number 3, I'm going to go north in Europe to Germany, to Deutschland, and talk about Martin Luther. Now, I never quite know what to do with Luther right here. Kind of like Augustine in Unit 1. Like, we've just begun the story. Next lecture, I'll be up there talking about Luther's views on political authority, and he'll become a very complicated figure all of a sudden. So I don't feel like I can put him in the top 2, but he's such an important figure. He's got to be higher than 4 or 5. He's got to be on the list, right? Because Luther is this hinge figure between the Middle Ages and the modern age. In some ways, it'll become clearer as we go that he remains a pretty medieval figure. He's pretty politically conservative. He believes in monarchy and the status quo and patriarchy and all that. But what he's ushering in is going to help tear down all of the Middle Ages, right? He's going to usher in something like modern individualism. The sense that what matters most is the individual trying to follow the dictates of their conscience as best they can, even if it means standing up against the entire world, right? Standing up to the Holy Roman Emperor and the cardinals of the church and saying, here I stand, I can do no other, God help me, amen. Now, he's still rooting this in faith, right? He still thinks like, I'm subject then to God's word. His conscience is captive to the word of God revealed in Scripture. But once we get to Unit 3, it's not going to be a big leap to say, well, but what if our conscience is rooted in other things, like the scientific method? Or what if it's rooted in simply daring to know and breaking with everything, including the church, including theological tradition? That'll get us into the Enlightenment. So Luther he's not like a twist in the story like Constantine was back in Unit 1, but it's certainly not where he imagined his life was going to take the world. And so I think for that reason, he's got to be there, and I'll put him right in the middle of my list, number 3. How about you? Who's 3rd for you?
Well, Chris, I will see your meddling German monk and raise you a meddling German monk. I also have Luther at number 3. And I won't say any more other than
that's a call, right? You keep using the gambling metaphors.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. If we're playing poker. Okay. I'm not going to say much more, but I do like the idea of thinking about Luther as a plot twist, and I think it is similar to Constantine, where as the Middle Ages were rolling along, you maybe didn't see that plot twist coming, that the unity of the church was going to shatter at the rate that it shattered and in the way that it shattered. Because by the time we get to the end of a century after Luther, we already have all of these fissures in the church. And I think I won't say anything more. Everything you said, right on. I think he fits. I think 3 is a good spot for him. Who do you have at number 2?
So the way I've kind of thought about this list, past Hildegard's weirdness, is I think of Luther and Machiavelli as like, what's going to tear down the Middle Ages? But that means I think I have to top my list. This is really a story of medieval civilization, right? The rise and fall of the Middle Ages. And so I want to top it with the 2 people I think best embody the Middle Ages. So number 2 for me is going to be Charlemagne. And I think in ways positive and negative, right? There is something inspiring about this civilization kind of rising from the ashes of the Western Roman Empire and this kind of 3 centuries of turbulence and uncertainty in the early Middle Ages. And all of a sudden here on Christmas Day in the year 800, we've got this person who the Germans would have thought of as a barbarian, right? This kind of fair-haired Germanic type, illiterate, and he's the emperor of the Romans now, and he's got this alliance with the church, and you've got the emergence of not just political stability and security, but Christendom. The sense of God didn't abandon us. God is actually working through these religious and political structures in tandem with each other to build a new kind of civilization. And he really does accomplish some important things. I mean, it's kind of dwarfed by all the attention we pay to the high Middle Ages and like Gothic cathedrals, but there's a kind of, it's called the Carolingian Renaissance. There's a resurgence in education. He sponsors philosophy. Some of the typefaces we use actually trace all the way back to the kind of script that the monks used under Charlemagne to scribe out documents and books. And that's great. I mean, the problem is it's also a reminder of what we talked about with Constantine 500 years before, right? Can Christians use power well? Can we use it in a Christ-like fashion? I mean, Charlemagne will spread the faith, in a sense, by forcing people to march through a river at the point of a spear and saying, now you're Christians, right? And he'll fight religious wars against Muslims in Spain. And that kind of brings back all the sort of concerns we should have had with Constantine as we got to the end of Unit 1. Now we're just putting them into a medieval context.
Wow, I really like that. I like your idea of, thinking about in these top 2, how do we build up the structures of this story? The way that I thought about my list has to do with thinking about sort of maybe more contemporary significances, like who has the biggest footprint going forward. So I think Michelangelo has a huge artistic footprint. Aquinas and Luther have huge religious footprints. I also like at number 2 how you have somebody who kind of lays the groundwork for a new civilization. And I have a similar person, but a very different person, and that is Muhammad. I mean, with Muhammad, we get the origins of a major world religion, a major world civilization that is also an inheritor of this classical Greco-Roman tradition. I mean, if we're looking honestly at like the cultural footprint globally of the people on this list, Muhammad has to be high on this list, just because of the sheer expanse of the Islamic religion and sort of civilizations that grow up around that. So I think he's unbelievably important. And I really do think part of the story of Unit 2 really is this interplay between Christianity and Islam and Byzantium, right? These 3 different remnants of the old Roman Empire, people picking up the pieces, some of the pieces here and there of it, and coming up with 3 real different expressions of civilization that we see interacting with each other in positive and in troubling ways. So I have Muhammad at number 2 on my list. Chris, who's number 1?
Yeah, I mean, I like your idea of thinking about contemporary significance, this kind of footprint and I think on that basis, Muhammad is probably the top of the list, right? But I would also say this is one reason Thomas Aquinas is at the top of my list. And if I were a smarter person or more of a philosopher, I would tell you about the resurgence of Thomistic philosophy since the late 19th century. I mean, like this dominates Catholic philosophy in the 20th century. There's a reason he's the patron saint of the University of St. Thomas down the road. But just on kind of the terms of CWC, I like him best as an embodiment of the kind of confidence of the Middle Ages, of medieval Christendom. The fact that he is so convinced that all truth is God's truth is really inspiring, I think, to a lot of us who work as scholars within a Christian college or university. Because since the scientific revolution, since the Enlightenment, in some ways since the Renaissance and Reformation, they've been at war with each other. I grew up with this very strong sense of like, can I be religious and trust science? Can I put faith and reason together into Aquinas? Of course you can. They both emerge from God. They both point back to God. They both worship God in some way. And that really is the heart of the Middle Ages, this notion of the word you use already, synthesis. that we can actually put these things that seem like their intention together and produce something new and pretty wonderful. And so even though he's not the most elegant or persuasive or eloquent writer that we encounter, just this kind of confident method of his arriving at truth is really inspiring. But what actually inspires me most at the end of the day is he has this vision near the end of his life. And it's not really clear what happens, but probably he sees heaven. He has something kind of like Hildegard's. And he kind of stops everything. And he says, he doesn't like refute his previous works. He doesn't deny them, but he says, compared to that, they're all straw. Right? And there's a kind of good reminder of humility too. Like we're striving to see what he called the beatific vision. We get as close as we can in this world. And in the end, we really are citizens of a heavenly kingdom, of a heavenly city. And we can't really build that down here. It's really going to come whether through an ecstatic vision or something in the afterlife, and we see God in the face. And so that's my final takeaway from Thomas Aquinas. Okay, I'm on pins and needles here, Sam. Who's left for you for number one?
All right, number one, again, I'm looking at long-ranging cultural footprint and significance. And I'm putting Johannes Gutenberg here. Because we don't, again, I think we undersell the Gutenberg printing press for how important this is. When we talk about the Middle Ages and everybody's a largely illiterate population, it's not because they're any dumber than us. It's because there isn't things to read. Why would you bother to learn to read? There's not stuff to read. All of the sudden, with the printing press, we get this explosion in literacy because now there is books and papers and leaflets and tracts are cheaper to produce, and you can mass produce things. So we get mass production, we get mass communication. I mean, it's sort of like saying, whoever invented the internet, if it actually was like a person, we'd be like, well, that person's so important. Or whoever invented personal computing. Gutenberg is kind of a version of that. Like there is before Gutenberg and after Gutenberg. The Luther doesn't happen without the Gutenberg printing press. And I really do think it changes the way we think about religion, because you can say sola scriptura like Luther does, but that is only a powerful thing if Bibles are in the hands of more people who can read them. And Gutenberg helps to provide both of those things: cheaper Bibles and a reason for literacy, and that expands education, and that affects people not just who are sitting around reading philosophy, but that affects people on the ground. It affects people in kind of all walks of life. So I just think he's so unbelievably important for literally changing the world. The world is different after him. Now, I will say a critique of that is like, if not Gutenberg, somebody else, right? And if I'm comparing that to Muhammad, it's like, you wouldn't say like, well, if Muhammad didn't have these visions, somebody else was going to.
Right.
I don't know about that, but I think Gutenberg, in part, I want to put him up here because I think we don't always pay enough attention to how important that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy, students, because every time you pick up your reading packet, when you pick up the test that's been run off by copy, I mean, think about how much of your life as a student, for better and worse, I guess, depends on Gutenberg, some like lingering sense of his significance. Well, Sam, thanks for playing Food Chain. It's one of my favorite games to play, and it's been a while since we've done it. So I don't know how we decide who wins, but maybe in our hearts we know.
Yeah, I will declare this game over. I will declare myself the winner, and we'll move on to segment 3.
All right, Sam, we're running out of time. Quickly, it's happy time for March 30th when we record this. Happy birthday to Robbie Coltrane, the veteran Scottish actor, turned 61 today. Now, at least for our students' generation, and frankly for all Americans, Coltrane is best known for playing Rubeus Hagrid in the Harry Potter films, which the Garrett's family just finished watching for like the 5th time during COVID era. Who is your favorite character in the Wizarding world, Sam?
I think this is an obvious one, but it's Remus Lupin.
Oh,
I mean, my daughter and I have a debate about this because she thinks he's like a super boring character, and for me, it's like, oh, that's my entry point character. He's a teacher. Like, I feel like if I was going to be somebody in that world, it would be Lupin. Plus, David Thewlis is great. I love David Thewlis. So yeah, I'm gonna say Remus Lupin is my favorite character in that world. Chris, happy anniversary to Seward's Folly. On this day in 1867, the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia for 2 cents per acre. What is your favorite thing about the 49th state?
So I'm teaching a class on World War II this semester, Sam. And a few weeks ago, I think I was talking about like World War II is this massive logistical effort. So in 1942, after Pearl Harbor, the United States spent $20 million, like in 1940s currency, $20 million to build a 1,700-mile highway across Canada all the way to Alaska. And that's really all I can tell you, except Alaska was basically under military government for the entire war because they were worried the Japanese would invade. But I like that as an illustration of basically World War II is this way of demonstrating the U.S. can just kind of build whatever it wants anywhere. It can even build a highway to Alaska in 1942. I don't know if that's interesting or not. Happy trails to the pandemic. It's been a year since Bethel pivoted spring 2020 entirely online. Remember that, Sam? Wow.
I do.
But with all Minnesotans older than 16, including the two of us, eligible for vaccination, we're now well on our way to herd immunity. Sam, what do you most look forward to doing again in a post-COVID world?
Again, I think this is pretty guessable because it has to be something that involves crowds, but I also am an extreme introvert, so I don't really want to talk to people. No. So I am most excited to go to baseball games and movies. I want to be in crowds, but I don't want to talk to people. I want to go and watch something. And I realize I'm thinking about the summer going to a movie, but I love summer movies. I love sitting in a dark movie theater watching something on a big screen, and I love going to Twins games and Saints games now. So yeah, that's my choice. How about you, Chris?
This is why it's hard. This is why it's hard to tell the two of us apart. Being alone in a crowd is my dream. Like, I love being at a baseball game, keeping score, which is a way of telling people I don't want to talk to you without being really rude about it. I love it.
Plus, it's like note taking. It's great.
And it'll be distance too. It'll be even better. You don't feel crowded because we're both tall guys. You get squeezed into the rows at Target Field. I can't wait. It'll be great. Sam, can you remind the students about TA office hours are expanded before the test, right?
Yes. So on Monday, April 5th, from 6 p.m., 7 p.m., and 8 p.m., there'll be TA-led exam reviews. At 6 p.m., they're going to be doing practice quotes. At 7 p.m., they're going to be doing practice connection questions. And at 8 p.m., they're going to be doing a big picture timeline. And then on Tuesday, we have our regular office hours. So during community time, 11:15 to 12:05 and 6 to 9 p.m., you can connect with the TAs. That was all off the top of the dome, Chris.
I put you on a spot and you just nailed that. You've done this before. I can tell. And then students, don't forget to upload your application essay before exam time. So 9 o'clock for BMOD students, 11:10 for CMOD. And remember, that's at your small group Moodle page is where you'll find that. So you just upload that, you'll be set to go. Sam, any last words before they take the test or before we head into Easter?
You're going to do great.
Okay. Well, that's how we do these webisodes. You might have noticed we actually forgot to do this during Unit 1. So we thought we've got a little time with Easter, so we'll give you a chance to review here. Hopefully this is helpful to you. We'll try to do it again for Unit 3, but until then, have a happy Easter. Say goodnight, Stacy.